Hello everyone, my name is Anton Boyko and welcome to my session. Today I would like to talk to you about DevOps and databases, and to be more precisely is how to survive the bloody enterprise. I also want to make one note here that what I will present you today, that's the architect viewpoint. So without further ado, let's continue the presentation itself. This is basically the way how I usually explain the modernization efforts breakdown if you want to implement something new in your enterprise. It may take some efforts to implement it, it may take some additional efforts to operate that later, but what I found here, and this is based on my experience, so your experience may be a bit different, but I actually did it. So I found that in each and every enterprise there is always a huge part of the political conversation, or let's say the amount of political efforts that you need to apply to do any modernization. And why is that? Again, I don't want to say anything bad about any other enterprise that I used to work with, but the idea here is that enterprise, they usually don't trust anyone. That makes perfect sense. They always want to be in control because the amount of responsibility that enterprise take is huge. So what you need to do from your side, you can still suggest them all the different ways to optimize, to modernize their infrastructure, their solutions and stuff like that, but you just need to prepare correctly to have that conversation with the enterprise in the first place. And how you usually do that, or let's say how I usually prepare to my conversation with an enterprise. I usually have this checklist and I follow it to make a business case for each and every suggestion I would like to make. So the step one is state a problem. Let's say in our example, because we're talking about databases, the problem is first, the DBA team always wants to be in control of what exact changes will be applied to the database, what exact scripts will be applied to the database, and they always want to do the explicit review of all those scripts. Okay, and the DBA team is, what you can expect from them is that they may have a good knowledge on SQL language, for example, if we're talking about MS SQL Server, but that's basically it. You cannot expect them to be the .NET developers as well. On the other hand, we have the dev team, and those guys, they are using the C# and they're using .NET, and the idea here is that they still want to have that flexibility. They still want to experiment, they still want to test different theories, different concepts, and then decide which one is the best. And again, they know C#, but they may not know to such a deep level the SQL language. So it means that currently you have two different teams which are both responsible for making this application up and running, but they do not share a common language at all. So first of all, let's, as soon as we stated that problem, evaluate the negative effects. So in my case, the negative effect is, if we will, let's say, use a tool like Entity Framework for my project, for my next project, it will mean that now the DBA team will slow down the review process because the DBA team may not be really familiar with that tool. And I did some brief calculations, and according to that calculations, the total amount of wasted hours for this particular code review, and we can say that we will run a code review at least once per sprint, so I mean, like, let's say it will be once per 2 weeks. I estimated that as on average 28 wasted hours per week. Okay, so this is my negative effect, 28 paid hours which we wasted because we don't have a really good established procedure of code review. So plan a solution. What I will plan as a solution for that one, and the solution I will show it to you later in the session on the demo, is that I will use basically some automation. I will create an automation around that, and I will allow my dev team to basically use their tool that they like. In that case, that will be the entity framework, and I will allow my DBA team to use their favorite tool, which is in this case something that is based on a T-SQL language. In that way, I expect to eliminate those wasted hours, maybe not all of them, but at least some of them I expect to be eliminated. Next one, highlight risks. So what kind of the risks we can have here? Oh, there may be a lot of those, it may be some risks in terms of delivery, it may be some risks in terms of, I don't know, like a timeline of this modernization and stuff like that, but let's highlight at least one just to make an example here. The risk is even after we will implement the automation, we still may have a case when some issue slipped through the code review and ended up being deployed to production. So this is the risk, and what we need to do next as soon as we highlighted it, now we want to prepare a mitigation strategy. So we're saying that we want to do that modernization, and we still have that risk that something may slip through the code review. As a mitigation strategy, I suggest that because we will have that automation, what we will be able to do, we will be able to run that automation again, or kind of run it in a reverse order, and basically deploy the previous working copy of our application together with the previous working copy of our database schema. Next one, outline assumptions. So the plan that I will present, it will work only if all those assumptions are correct. And in my case, the assumptions may be, for example, that I will use, let's say, an Azure DevOps as a tool for the automation. Why is that? Because again, I do have a lot of experience with that, so that was easy for me to estimate the amount of efforts needed to automate all that stuff with Azure DevOps. Okay, that's my first assumption. What can be my next assumption then? I can say that, okay, because I want to reduce the amount of wasted hours, I can make an assumption that during the code review by the DBA team, at least one DBA team member needs to be available for my dev team during the business hours to actually provide a detailed feedback and maybe some extra explanations if needed. Because again, as I was saying, I expect from my dev team to know .NET, to know C#, and I expect my DBA team to know a lot about databases. So that is why I want to make sure that both guys are available so they can talk to each other. So that's my assumptions, at least for this example. Let's go next. Model positive impact. In my case, the positive impact that I see is that I would like to reduce at least by two times, I would like to reduce the amount of wasted hours. So I was talking about modeling 28 wasted hours of a teamwork per week, and my model for the positive impact will be to reduce that to 14 hours of wasted time per week. As you can see, I was unable to eliminate all the wasted hours, but at least I was able to cut them down. And the next part is present and be ready to execute. And I will talk about that next, but before I will do that, let me highlight two important, extremely important takeaways here. Probably the most important takeaways out of the whole presentation. First of all, you can't improve what you can't measure. So that means that as soon as you will start this conversation with an enterprise or basically any of your clients that want to introduce this or that improvements, you need to know your baseline. Otherwise, it will be impossible and you will fail that project. And the second important key takeaway from this one is that you can't eliminate the human factor. So that's that's impossible. Let's just kind of accept that this is impossible to eliminate the human factor. But what you can do, you can limit an impact of human factor. So if you have some tasks that can be automated, maybe a simple task, maybe that task will just take, I don't know, like 5 clicks with your mouse or something like that. Still, if you will automate that, you will reduce the amount of human factor because you will just create less space for a human to make an error. Let's talk a bit more about this present and being ready to execute part. So let's say what we have here in my model and what I will show during my presentation to my client. So first I will say, okay, currently on my project I have a team of 5 engineers. Okay. Next, I'm saying that if it's 5 engineers, each of them basically works 40 hours per week, so it means 200 working hours per week. Out of those 200 working hours per week, I spent 50 hours for idle kind of activities. Here I basically mark them as focus, so it means that this can be like different Scrum ceremonies, that can be, let's say, the conversation near the coffee machine, that can be some kind of a delays while I'm waiting for some other person to, I don't know, like respond in a chat and stuff like that. So I assume that 25% of my team capacity I'm basically spending for these idle kind of a focus activities. And again, as I was saying before, in my negative impact, I have 28 wasted hours before the modernization. And according to my model, I should have only 14 wasted hours after the modernization. And let's say that to implement that modernization that I will show to you in my demos, I will need to take 80 hours of workload. So basically 1 person working for 2 weeks. What I will then present to my client, I will present this table. So this is the before optimization. What I have here, I'm basically having here the 6 months timeline, and as you can see, I shown the func basically hours. So this is how many hours I can dedicate to implement the functional requirements of that project. Non-functional, we will skip them at least for now. Then I basically showing what it will take, or like what it will cost to my client to basically pay for that idle ceremony kind of an hours, and then the amount of wasted hours on top of that. Okay, and this is the breakdown for the next 6 months of my project. And then I have an after table, and what I have here, as you can see, during the first months I reduce the amount of hours that I will be able to spend on my functional requirements, because 80 hours now goes to non-functional, and 80 hours, that's exact amount of time I need to take to implement that modernization. In addition to that, starting from February, here in my plan, starting from the 2nd month, because the modernization should be done by that time, I will start reducing the amount of wasted hours. As you can see, the amount of idle hours will still remain the same. And what I would like to highlight here, so first of all, as I was showing, it may look like that we will invest into this modernization and we will actually deliver less features during our first months. And this is totally true, and there are no other ways how it can be done in general. But if you will check how many hours we will be able to deliver, let's say for the February, you can see that even for February, I'm already catching up and I'm already starting delivering more. And another important thing, let's say that we run for 6 months using this approach, and at the end of month number 6, at the end of June, I will be able to deliver 9% of work more. So almost 10% actually of work more I will be deliver if I will invest in January in this modernization project. So this is the way how I usually present that to my client, and here, as you can see, I'm not talking technologies, I'm talking business, I'm talking money to them, and they understand that language really well. Saying that, let's switch to the technical part and see how I will actually implement that example with my ASP.NET Web API, my Azure DevOps, and a bunch of other tools that I have.